The Tulip Mania bubble, the first economic crash prologue, the black petals of greed in the annals of economic history. Few events are as enigmatic, as darkly fascinating, and as cautionary as the Tulip Mania of the 17th century. It was a time when the Dutch Golden Age, a period of unparalleled wealth, art, and innovation, was shadowed by an irrational frenzy that would come to be known as the First Economic Bubble. The tulip, a flower of delicate beauty, became the unlikely protagonist in a tale of greed, speculation, and eventual ruin. This is not just a story of financial folly, it is a parable of human nature, a dark mirror reflecting the depths of our desires and the consequences of our excesses. Now, before we move on, please help a small channel grow. Please like and subscribe. If you have any comments, good or bad, leave them below. Back to the story. The Tulip Mania was not merely a historical event, it was a psychological phenomenon, a collective madness that gripped an entire nation. It was a time when the value of a single tulip bulb could exceed the price of a grand house on the Amsterdam canals, when fortunes were made and lost in the blink of an eye, and when the line between reality and illusion blurred into a feverish dream. But like all dreams, it was destined to end, and when it did, the awakening was brutal. This essay will delve into the origins, the frenzy, and the catastrophic collapse of the Tulip Mania. It will explore the social, economic, and psychological factors that fueled the bubble, and it will examine the aftermath of the crash, which left a scar on the Dutch psyche that would endure for generations. Along the way, we will encounter a cast of characters, merchants, speculators, artisans, and aristocrats, whose lives were irrevocably altered by the tulip trade. We will also draw parallels to modern economic bubbles, reminding ourselves that the lessons of the past are often forgotten, only to be repeated in new forms. The Tulip Mania is a story of beauty and decay, of hope and despair, of light and shadow. It is a story that resonates across the centuries, a dark and entertaining reminder of the fragility of human ambition. So let us step back in time, to the Dutch Republic of the 1630s, and witness the rise and fall of the first economic crash. Chapter 1: The Flower of Kings. To understand the Tulip Mania, we must first understand the tulip itself. The flower, with its vibrant colors and elegant form, was not native to Europe. It was a product of the Ottoman Empire, brought to the continent in the mid-16th century by diplomats, merchants, and botanists who were captivated by its exotic beauty. The tulip quickly became a symbol of wealth and status, a luxury item coveted by the elite. The Dutch, with their burgeoning mercantile empire, were particularly enamored with the tulip. The flower became a status symbol, a way for the newly wealthy merchant class to display their affluence and sophistication. Tulips were featured in still life paintings, cultivated in private gardens, and exchanged as precious gifts. But it was not just the flower's beauty that made it desirable, it was its rarity. Tulips are not easy to cultivate. They require specific conditions to thrive, and even then, they bloom only once a year. Moreover, the most prized tulips were those affected by a virus known as the tulip-breaking virus, which caused the petals to develop striking, flame-like patterns. These broken tulips were unpredictable. A bulb that produced a stunning flower one year might yield a plain one the next. This unpredictability added to their allure, making them even more valuable. By the early 17th century, the tulip had become a cultural obsession in the Dutch Republic. It was no longer just a flower, it was a commodity, a symbol of wealth, and a source of national pride. But as demand for tulips grew, so did the seeds of speculation. The stage was set for a frenzy that would consume the nation. Chapter 2: The Birth of a Market. The tulip trade began innocently enough. Gardeners and botanists would sell bulbs to wealthy collectors, who would then cultivate them in their gardens. But as demand outstripped supply, a new market emerged, the futures market. Instead of buying and selling actual bulbs, traders began dealing in contracts that promised the delivery of bulbs at a future date. This allowed speculators to bet on the future price of tulips without ever having to handle the flowers themselves. The futures market was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it allowed the tulip trade to flourish, creating opportunities for profit and investment. On the other hand, it introduced an element of risk and uncertainty. Prices began to fluctuate wildly, driven by speculation rather than the intrinsic value of the bulbs. The market became a playground for gamblers, a place where fortunes could be made or lost in an instant. The Dutch, with their entrepreneurial spirit and love of risk-taking, embraced the tulip trade with gusto. Taverns and coffee houses became hubs of tulip speculation, where traders gathered to buy and sell contracts. The market was unregulated, and information was scarce, creating an environment ripe for manipulation and fraud. Rumors and hearsay could send prices soaring or plummeting, and traders often relied on little more than intuition and luck. As the market grew, so did the stakes. Tulip prices began to rise at an alarming rate, fueled by a combination of genuine demand and speculative frenzy. Rare bulbs, such as the Semper Augustus and the Viceroy, became the stuff of legend, fetching prices that defied reason. At the height of the mania, a single bulb of the Semper Augustus could sell for as much as 6,000 florins, enough to buy a grand house on the Amsterdam canals, or feed a family for a lifetime. The tulip trade had become a speculative bubble, a phenomenon where the price of an asset far exceeds its intrinsic value. But few at the time recognized the danger. To most, the rising prices were a sign of prosperity, a testament to the Dutch Republic's economic might. The bubble continued to inflate, fueled by greed, optimism, and a collective belief that the good times would never end. Chapter 3: The Frenzy. The years 1636 and 1637 marked the peak of the Tulip Mania, a period of unprecedented speculation and excess. The tulip trade had become a national obsession, with people from all walks of life, merchants, artisans, farmers, and even servants, drawn into the frenzy. It was a time when the ordinary rules of economics seemed to be suspended, when the value of a tulip bulb could exceed that of a lifetime's earnings. The market was characterized by a sense of euphoria and irrationality. Traders would buy bulbs at inflated prices, not because they valued the flowers themselves, but because they believed they could sell them at an even higher price to someone else. This speculative behavior, known as the greater fool theory, drove prices to dizzying heights. The market was no longer about the tulips, it was about the profits that could be made from trading them. The frenzy was fueled by a lack of regulation and transparency. Contracts were often traded multiple times before the bulbs were even delivered, creating a complex web of obligations and debts. The market was rife with speculation, manipulation, and fraud. Traders would spread rumors to drive up prices, or sell bulbs they did not own, hoping to buy them back at a lower price before the contract came due. The line between legitimate trade and gambling blurred, and the market became a breeding ground for greed and deceit. At the height of the mania, the tulip trade reached absurd levels. Stories abound of bulbs being traded for vast sums of money, or exchanged for valuable goods such as land, livestock, and even entire estates. One famous anecdote tells of a sailor who, mistaking a rare tulip bulb for an onion, ate it for breakfast. The bulb was worth a small fortune, and the sailor was arrested and imprisoned for his mistake. The story, whether true or apocryphal, captures the absurdity of the times. But even as the bubble continued to inflate, there were signs that it could not last. The market was becoming increasingly unstable, with prices fluctuating wildly from day to day. Some traders began to cash out, taking their profits and leaving the market. Others, sensing the danger, refused to honor their contracts, leading to disputes and legal battles. The bubble was beginning to show cracks, but few were willing to acknowledge the impending collapse. Chapter 4: The Crash. The Tulip Mania bubble burst in February 1637, almost as suddenly as it had begun. The exact trigger for the crash is unclear, but it is likely that a combination of factors, market saturation, a loss of confidence, and the realization that prices had become unsustainable, led to a sudden and dramatic collapse in tulip prices. The crash began with a series of failed auctions, where bulbs that had once fetched astronomical prices now found no buyers. Panic spread through the market as traders rushed to sell their contracts, driving prices down even further. Within days, the value of tulip bulbs had plummeted, leaving many traders with worthless contracts and crippling debts. The collapse of the tulip market had far-reaching consequences. Many of those who had invested heavily in tulips were ruined, their fortunes wiped out overnight. The crash also had a ripple effect on the wider economy, as the sudden loss of wealth led to a contraction in spending and investment. The Dutch Republic, which had been riding high on the wave of its golden age, was plunged into an economic downturn. The aftermath of the crash was marked by anger, recrimination, and a search for scapegoats. Traders who had profited from the mania were accused of fraud and manipulation, while those who had lost everything demanded compensation. The government, caught off guard by the sudden collapse, struggled to respond. In the end, it was decided that contracts entered into before the crash would be honored at a fraction of their original value, a compromise that left many dissatisfied. The Tulip Mania had come to an end, but its legacy would endure. The crash left a deep scar on the Dutch psyche, a reminder of the dangers of speculation and the fragility of wealth. It also marked the beginning of a more cautious approach to finance, as the Dutch sought to learn from the mistakes of the past. Chapter 5: The aftermath of the Tulip Mania was more than just a financial crash, it was a cultural and psychological event that left a lasting impact on Dutch society. The crash exposed the dark side of human nature, the greed, the irrationality, and the capacity for self-delusion that can drive markets to unsustainable heights. It also revealed the fragility of economic systems and the ease with which they can be destabilized by speculation and excess. In the years following the crash, the Dutch Republic underwent a period of introspection and reform. The government introduced new regulations to prevent future bubbles, including restrictions on futures trading and greater transparency in financial markets. The tulip trade, once a symbol of national pride, became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of speculation and the importance of sound economic principles. But the lessons of the Tulip Mania were not confined to the Dutch Republic. The crash became a reference point for future economic bubbles, from the South Sea bubble of the 18th century to the dot-com bubble of the late 20th century. Each time, the same patterns of speculation, euphoria, and collapse repeated themselves, as if humanity was doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past. The Tulip Mania also left its mark on art and literature. The crash inspired a wave of satirical works, from paintings to plays, that mocked the folly of the tulip traders. The tulip itself, once a symbol of wealth and beauty, became a symbol of vanity and excess. In the works of artists like Jan Bruegel the Younger and Adriaan van Utrecht, the tulip was depicted as a fleeting, ephemeral thing, a reminder of the transience of worldly riches. Epilogue: The Shadow of the Tulip. The Tulip Mania is a story that continues to captivate and disturb us, centuries after it occurred. It is a story of beauty and decay, of hope and despair, of light and shadow. It is a story that reminds us of the fragility of human ambition and the dangers of unchecked greed. But it is also a story of resilience. The Dutch Republic, though shaken by the crash, emerged from the crisis stronger and more cautious. The lessons of the Tulip Mania were not forgotten, and they continue to inform our understanding of economics and human behavior. As we look back on the Tulip Mania, we are reminded that the past is not just a collection of facts and figures, it is a mirror that reflects our own desires, fears, and flaws. The tulip, with its delicate petals and fleeting beauty, is a fitting symbol for the ephemeral nature of wealth and power. And the story of the Tulip Mania, with its dark and entertaining twists, is a timeless reminder of the consequences of our excesses. In the end, the Tulip Mania is not just a historical event, it is a parable, a cautionary tale that resonates across the centuries. It is a story that reminds us to tread carefully in the pursuit of wealth, to be wary of the seductive allure of speculation, and to remember that even the most beautiful flowers can wither and die. And so, as we close this chapter on the first economic crash, we are left with a sense of unease, a lingering shadow that reminds us of the fragility of our world. The tulip may have faded, but its legacy endures, a dark and entertaining reminder of the perils of greed and the enduring power of human folly. Please like and subscribe,